So on today's podcast, we're diving into the topic that might seem obvious to us all, but one we have to name. And that is the fact that we are all still in recovery. The past 3 years have taken a collective toll on people and organizations. And even though there's light at the end of the tunnel and we're coming out of it, we must be able to acknowledge that it's been challenging and lead our path forward. Welcome back to The Thermostat with Jason Barger. If you're currently on a commute, a walk, or just a micro break in your day, glad you're making time to step back, to think, and to reflect on the next steps on your journey. I've never been more convinced the best leaders and team cultures in the world are the ones that make time to step back, breathe in good oxygen, and calibrate their thermostat. I hope today's conversation leaves you feeling grounded and inspired. Now let's dive into today's topic to engage our minds and hearts in order to authentically lead and create compelling cultures wherever we are in the world. Hey everybody, it's Jason and welcome back to the Thermostat Podcast. I am so glad you're with us wherever you are and however you're coming to the podcast today. Welcome. So glad you're here. We are in season 7, well over 160 episodes and climbing every week. So if you are somebody who's been here from the very beginning of this podcast, so glad. Thank you. Huge congrats to you for continuing to show up, and thank you to you because without listeners, this is just a guy talking into a microphone. So glad there are people out there that are liking this, that it's resonating with, and it's contributing to your path. Also, if you're new to the podcast, thank you. So glad you're here, and I would invite you, actually, whether you're new or old, I invite you to go back and check out all the past episodes. So much great stuff out there. Lucky interviews and grateful dialogue that I've had with thought leaders from around the globe, and then also micropods about different topics that I think will be relevant and resonate with you where you are in your journey. So check them out. My commitment to you always is that this will be a place for you to step back, to think about your own life, to think about how you're showing up, and certainly the cultures that you're trying to create in your life and your work. So glad you're here. Before we start on today's episode, if you will do me the quick favor and rate this podcast 5 stars, of course, and also leave an authentic review, your own words about how and why this resonates with you, why it's important and relevant in the world today. Those are the ways in which this is, helps people find it. And I just really appreciate if you're willing to do that. Of course, subscribe, rate, review, and then if you're feeling extra saucy, share it with the people in your network, your team, your colleagues, friends, whoever it is, social media, whatever that is for you, because that's the way that this spreads, and that's what we're ultimately trying to do is spread good messages around the world. So a few podcasts ago, I shared Fast Company's 4 leadership trends for the year ahead, and I shared my initial reactions and observations of the list, and it got a good response, and people were interested in diving in a little bit more to those topics. So we're in the midst of a 4-part series of kind of dissecting each one of those trends that they identified, and I'm providing some observations and some insights on each of those trends. So today is our last one of this series that might seem obvious to us all, but one we have to name, and that is the fact that we are all still in recovery. The past 3 years have taken a collective toll on people and organizations, and even though there's light at the end of the tunnel and we're coming out of it, we must be able to acknowledge that it's been challenging and lead our path forward. But before we dive into today's topic, let's pause, take a quick break, and we'll be right back. Today's podcast is supported by Epcon Communities. Epcon Communities is one of the nation's premier builders of exceptional ranch-style homes and lifestyle-rich neighborhoods that are popular with the active adult market as they seek to right-size into a home design that fits their needs. When it comes to a home, everyone is looking for different things. Luckily, there are so many things to love in an Epcon design that anyone can personalize a perfect solution that suits their personal stage in life. Their homes are designed and built to live well by connecting you to the outdoors and your community. A private courtyard forms the centerpiece of the home, allowing you access to a quiet, peaceful, private oasis just steps from anywhere inside. And with open floor plans, luxurious kitchens and baths, and versatile room arrangements, the only limit to making their homes something that is truly yours is your imagination. Visit epconcommunities.com today to see the many remarkable neighborhoods under development right now across the country by Epcon and its local franchises. I've had the privilege of speaking at a number of Epcon events over the years, and it has always been great to see how eager their people are to implement the thermostat culture's principles and their desire for positive accountability and spreading good oxygen to other people. So, cheers to the Epcon team and their commitment to creating a thermostat culture across the country. And thank you for supporting messages like this. So the 4 leadership trends that we've been focused on for this 4-part series that came from Fast Company, where they identified these 4 trends for the year ahead. They said the first one, which was the first part of this series, where they identified that your workplace is on the hook for well-being. So we dove in. If you didn't hear that one, check it out. We talked all about well-being and creating a culture where that is the care of the leadership and of the culture. Then we talked about it's time to focus on a new kind of safety, and connected to that, psychological safety, and how do we do that, and what are some tips to think about. And then last episode we talked about don't just respect differences, design for them, and we talked about neurodiversity and the way different brains think, and can we begin to be thoughtful about options of and really leveraging the way people learn to help maximize their efforts and their contributions. And then today we're going to talk about the fact that we're all still in recovery, coming out of 3 weirdo worlds of a pandemic and so many intense issues circling our globe that maybe we're a bit still in recovery. And so it's okay to name that. So Fast Company, one of their trends is they called it, we're all still in recovery. And I'll be Captain Obvious here, again, just to name the thing that we all know, but sometimes we need to step back and remember that over the past 3 years, we've all experienced intense collective experiences. There's been a global pandemic, if you remember that, something we had never been through, nor could we ever imagine, but a global pandemic we never imagined and threatened our safety in new ways. We had repeated episodes of police violence and by the way, and school shootings and intense issues of systematic racism that I wish I could say all of that was over, but it still is happening. And yet during these past 3 years, it has continued to be even more intense and sad to see that these issues still exist. We have a war in Ukraine. We've had insurrection on the U.S. Capitol. And anything else you might have been experiencing already just in your own personal lives. I mean, divorces have been up. Alcohol and drug use has been up. Mental health concerns have been up. We all, if we're honest with ourselves, again, hopefully, if you're one of the listeners that feel like you have, somehow made your way through all of that fairly unscathed, meaning that you haven't had any of that directly related to you, then congrats, I guess. But all of us have been impacted by just the sadness, the trauma, the challenges that everybody has been facing. And so, we've all been through this collective trauma, and that carries with us into our organizations. We know that. And certainly I know that firsthand from the teams and organizations that I serve, from research and study and observations. We know that the experiences we've been having as humans carry into our organizations. And what this means in the workplace is that we all must understand how our needs, as leaders, as employees, as humans, may be different in a post-traumatic context. What may be a reaction to a relatively recent event could be entirely different than a reaction to repeated or extended trauma. We know this, and we also know that not everybody within our teams and organizations is going to respond the same way. Some are still recovering from intense, again, all the stuff that we've experienced over the last 3 years. And also then when something very similar creeps back up in the news, it sends another vibration and another nerve is hit, and it can tend to dig up that past stuff that we've all been through. Research also shows that when recovering from collective trauma, we're hyper-vigilant to any possible threat that's around us, and that those reactions fluctuate similar to microclimates. So just like it can be raining and 10 degrees cooler in one part of the town and then sunny and warmer only 5 miles away, reactions to various events and conversations can vary based on the topic at hand and who's involved or what part of the organization you might be stumbling in or out of. All leaders and cultures need to use high levels of emotional intelligence. And in fact, if you read any article in the world today, it's talking about how it's required that we all need to raise our level of emotional intelligence in order to be aware of what people might be experiencing and then helping how do we navigate our way forward. That all of these complex issues are not things that we solve overnight. I wish they were. I'd snap my fingers and fix them all immediately. But how do we navigate our way forward? And how do we begin? So as I think about the fact that we're all still in recovery, I also think about a couple of tips, or at least just some things that I would share, some research-based, some observations, and some practices that I'm doing as I support teams and organizations with their own leadership development, with the culture that they're trying to shape, or with their clarity around mission, vision, and values. So the first thing I'd share related to this is that at the time when we're all still in recovery, again, whether we acknowledge it or not, we're still kind of coming out of this fog, that I would lift up the idea of listening campaigns. I've talked about this concept, or at least referred to it in the past on other pods, but I've been a part of them in some of the organizations that I serve, or help to consult on how to do them and help encourage places to do this across industries. But creating a strategy to get out and go be with your people and listen to your people, to go on these kind of listening campaigns to see and listen to what are the obstacles, the challenges, the anxieties that they are still feeling, perhaps from the last 3 years, and there's still some kind of collective residual challenge that they're carrying with them, some baggage from that, or that they might currently be experiencing now that may be something new, but because of their tiredness or just fatigue from the last few years, that maybe it's landing on them in a different way. And so some of the most successful leaders and teams and organizations that I've watched and observed or worked with have been strategic about doing these listening campaigns to get out with their people and to gauge, in my language, kind of take the temperature of what are those obstacles, those challenges, those anxieties that they might be experiencing and feeling. And then, therefore, we can get back to saying, okay, not beyond just setting the temperature, what is it that we can do, or taking the temperature, what is it that we can do to set the temperature? So this concept of the listening campaigns has been really successful in many places with leaders, teams, and organizations to create that strategy, to go out, to seek out, to listen to those obstacles and challenges, anxieties that people maybe are feeling coming out of this, 3 years, or that they're experiencing right now. And in my words, that's the way of taking the temperature, understanding what is the temperature of the organization. Therefore, then after that, you can use that data to say, okay, then what would we do? What's the temperature we want to set moving forward? And what are we going to intentionally do then to move the needle closer to what we want rather than what they're experiencing? So these listening campaigns have been very successful and helpful for leaders and entire organizations to acknowledge the things that they're feeling. Then another tip that I would share, and an observation that I'm having in a lot of places, is we got to get back to laughing. We got to get back to laughing. And some places certainly are. I know, the world has been heavy and intense for some time now, and still is in so many ways, and certainly on particular days where it feels like it's happening again. But I'm seeing more and more teams and organizations getting back to planning big events, having fun, just letting their people let loose, laugh, seeking joy, laughter, and intentional environments that aren't so serious. So much of the world we live in is serious. So much of it has been intense and challenging. And also, when it comes to political uncertainty and economic uncertainty and changing market conditions and all that, oftentimes organizations and businesses can fall into very serious modes. But seeking joy, laughter, and intentional environments that aren't so serious is helping people kind of get back to laughing and enjoying the journey, and helping them show that, hey, even in the midst of the obstacles and challenges we face, we're going to find time, make time. We're going to prioritize, enjoying ourselves, laughing, and seeking joy along the way, even in the midst of the challenges or obstacles we might be facing. And then the third thing that I bring up as it relates to this topic is we've got to honor rest and recovery, and continue to honor rest and recovery. I would encourage you to listen to my past podcast that I've done. You just search up my name and The Secret to Elite Performance. We'll talk about this connection between we need to have a new association with the word rest, and realize that many of us need to have a better association with rest and understand the distinction between rest and recovery. Because rest is, something like deliberate sleep, and is one thing. That's one of the ways that we rest. But also resting can mean the mental rests we give ourselves throughout a day, the mental breaks from our computers, the mental breathing and walks that we might take to get ourselves up, the physical working out and, challenging our bodies to kind of work out, but then also resting our bodies. The emotional rest that we try to give ourselves, that if we have a high workload and we're working, allowing our brains to defragment, to kind of reboot our brains and our computers, we need to have a healthy association that kind of deliberate rest actually then helps performance raise. And so rest is one thing, and then the distinction between recovery. So recovery oftentimes is a vacation, sabbaticals, time off. I know that my body needs rest. I need periodic moments of rest and breaks and mental rests and physical and emotional rests. But then I also need time for recovery and extended time to be away, for sabbatical, for time off, so that my body and my mind can kind of recover in ways that just resting isn't the same thing. Again, if you think about serious athletes, then that's where this analogy makes the most sense. But we often think about it only in those terms. But the reality is all of us that are trying to perform, and in many cases with high expectations and high deliverables and pressure and anxiety that comes from it, we need to increase and honor our association with rest and recovery. And when we do, again, listen to that past podcast about elite performance, the reality is all our performance raises when we are healthier individually and collectively. It's counterintuitive that in our culture, we've taught ourselves that we think that just the faster we run, the further we get. And so we've, quote unquote, outwork the competition. And of course, it requires hard work. Of course, it requires focus and intentionality and grit, of course, but not at the expense of our health. When all we do is grind, our performance actually suffers, and the research shows us that. So we got to be able to take a deep breath, to rest, to allow our bodies, our minds, our hearts to recover, and then name what is that next step that we're going to take. And then my own last observation that I'll share with today is actually one related to all four of these that I've been sharing on these podcasts, these micropods, and that is that if you didn't think developing leaders and culture was important before 2020 or these last 3 years of weirdo world, then now you do, or now you should. And what that simply means is if you just are crossing your fingers and hoping your people and culture, magically develop in the ways you want into the future, or even worse than this, you just want them to kind of quote unquote go back to what it was pre-pandemic, then that's where you're going to go is backwards. And in fact, it's not sustainable. So the best leaders, teams, and organizations are proactively, intentionally designing, connecting, and leading the way into that intentional future that they want to create together. And so the strategy for developing people and culture and clarity of mission, vision, and values is exactly that, intentional. So I hope today's episode got you thinking in some new ways, maybe thinking about the listening campaign and that maybe you could be a part of in your organization, getting back to laughing and what strategically are you doing there? How are you honoring rest and recovery? And just acknowledging the fact that we all might still be in recovery. So I hope this has resonated with you. If you have any feedback for us, email info@jasonvbarger.com, and we'll continue to try to meet you where you are with content that's coming in the future. Lastly, I hope you go back and give a listen to a number of the past podcasts, like I mentioned earlier. So many relevant topics and themes that will add value to your journey. I hope you'll check them out, share them, and then be ready for the next one that's coming next week. Cheers to the path ahead of us in the year ahead, and remember that the future of leadership is you, is me, is us. We need to get clear on the temperature we hope to set, and then be courageous and committed to breathing oxygen into the mindsets and actions that will sustain our path forward. Step back. Remember, be a thermostat. Breathe good oxygen. Thank you for listening to today's podcast, and I hope the messages and questions stimulate positive change along your path. As always, if these messages resonate with you and add value to your life, I hope you'll help amplify them throughout the world. Please rate, comment, and share on whatever podcast or social media platform you're using, and share this podcast with the people in your life or work who should be part of these conversations. That way, this spirit does, in fact, spread. If these messages or developing leaders and culture would be helpful to you and your organization, please contact us at jasonvbarger.com, jasonvbarger.com. And remember, we are all ambassadors for the culture we want to create in our life and work. We have to own the vision we want to be a part of. The future of leadership is you, is me, is us. Be a thermostat.